So good morning, everyone. Welcome to my new workspace. I've been determined to try and deal with a little bit of the brain fuzz that comes with running a business and to create somewhere in the house that is my own space to work, which is good for me. It's good for the household, so there's less paperwork and computers and flowery books around the house, but it's also good for filming because it means that I've got somewhere that's a bit more consistent and hopefully, I'm not going to promise it, hopefully a bit quieter for me to talk to you. The kids have gone back to school today, which is again good for them because they really enjoy school and good for me. But anyway, that's enough of my chat about our household structure. I thought I'd talk to you today about what I have been reading about and thinking about over Christmas and also throughout last year. So one of the things that we really noted was that our flowers need food, and that food comes from our soil and the sun. But we wanted to make as much of that as we can to reduce cost, to work a bit smarter, to reduce waste, and also just to close that kind of cycle of what's going on in our field, so as much as possible stays on the field. So one of the ways that we're going to be working on that over the next year or 2 or 3 is composting, which is not my strength, but we're working on it. But the other is about making our own feeds and amendments. So to help us with that, we started last year by using nettles because they're freely available, they're a great nutrition source, and we've got tons of them in the field. We also planted one thing in the field last year. So we planted some bucking, and we did that in one way. We did it from root cuttings, and we just swap. So I did some cuttings to make some brachioglottis, and I swapped those for some roots of bucking. So that's one of the things you really can do as a flower farmer. Find flowery friends who have things that you want and give them something that they want, so that we share the resources that we have and also save ourselves a little bit of money. So that is one of my top tips from today. Make yourself a flowery friend and see how you can help each other and see what you can share. Anyway, the roots I cut up into 1-inch bits, and we'll talk about that another day. I planted them last May and they sprouted. It gave us about 12 new plants. So bucking forms really big roots, really deep roots. Once you've planted it, you won't be able to move it. So be careful that you put it somewhere you want it. But that will give us those lovely leaves that we can use for our feeds, and also to go on our compost, and we can put it directly on the soils and leave them to decompose as well. So just really planning in advance. It takes time to do some of those things. And that's really where we got to last year. And then I met Hattie, and I'll put a link to who she is. She's Gathered at Dusk. She's another Yorkshire flower farmer, and she recommended this book. So this is a book by Nigel Palmer. I bought it because I don't like to photocopy pages or anything like that. It wasn't particularly expensive, and I've steadily been reading that over the course of, since last summer really, when we went on holiday. And then it was lots of October actually, just reading about things that we have, easy amendments, and also the reasons that we might want to use things and the different styles. Okay, that's the background. Today I am going to talk you through calcium, or how we can make calcium a bit more available to our flowers. Calcium is useful in the stages of root generation, and it's also really useful for tissue cell production, so new growth. That's what I'm really interested in. It is a mineral that's available in the soil, but it might be quite low if you're doing lots of plant turnover. One of the ways to check that is by doing a soil test. The other thing that is important to think about is how our plants get their calcium. So calcium is available in eggshells, so we're going to use eggshells because we eat lots of eggs in our house. But you could also use shells from the sea if you are near the sea. So oysters, clams, mussels are really good to use. So it's about what you have easily accessible to you. I wish I lived near the sea so that I had seaweed that I could just pick up and bring home, but I don't. So I'm using eggshells. So the thing to think about is how the calcium is available. And by that, I mean how our plants are going to get it from the soil into their roots and into their plant structure. So we can just grind up or crumple our eggshells and put it on the surface of our soil. And in time, that will increase the calcium availability in the soil, but it will take a long time to break it down. The other way that we can increase it is that when we're mulching with our own compost, we can put eggshells into our compost or broken up shells into our compost. But again, it takes a long time for that calcium to be available. So the bit of chemistry that I was talking about yesterday in our quick Instagram post is the type of calcium. So in our eggshells, we have calcium carbonate. Boring. The important thing is that that's not soluble, so it's a powder. So when we put it in water, we pour it on our soil, we're still essentially just putting dry eggshell on top and waiting for it to break down. What we're going to do is we're going to break it up, and you can do that using a pestle mortar or you can use a grinder, and we're going to dissolve our eggshells or whatever shells or bones you're using in some vinegar. Now the science here is that changes what it is. So if you're bored of the science, it makes it more soluble, so it's in a watery form so our plants can take it up. If you're a geek like me, then it changes it from calcium carbonate to calcium acetate. And that is water soluble. It actually has less calcium in it than calcium carbonate, but it's more freely accessible to our plants and therefore they get more. Okay, I told you I was a geek. So the final thing that I've read about both in this book and in kind of some YouTube searches and through some Google research is about stability of this as a feeder amendment. So you can add it to your other feed. So if you want to add it, the calcium that is, to seaweed feed if that's what you're using, or if you're using nettle feed or bocking feed, any of those things, you can add this to give your plants an extra bit of calcium. So that's quite nice. Also, because it's made in acid, you can store it really easily, which for me means that you can make loads of it in one go, and then you can put it to one side in a jar that's airtight once it's made, and you can ignore it. And when you need it, you put some in your watering can, and then you put it back on your shelf. I like that because it means that I don't have to use it up quickly. I don't have to make it up in small amounts. I can just make a ton of it. I don't have a ton to make at the moment. But I have some to make, and then you can, once it's done, ignore it and just use it as you need it. I like that. Shelf stable feeds that I can make in bulk. Perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to talk you through what we have to make this. It's so simple. Please excuse the advertising. I'm going to turn this bottle around because I'm not advertising for any of the supermarkets. So this is vinegar, this is white wine vinegar. The recommendation from Nigel Palmer is that you actually use cider vinegar, and that's because there's more acid apparently in it. But my supermarket doesn't have it. I don't have an orchard, and so I have bought white wine vinegar, and I think any clear vinegar is absolutely fine. So nothing with kind of extra flavourings added to it, but cider vinegar, like white wine vinegar. This is what we've chosen. Now we've got eggs. So these are eggshells from the past couple of weeks. They are eggs that have been used for baking, eggs that have been used for omelette, boiled eggs for breakfast. And as we've used them, they have been rinsed in the sink and then just popped straight into a dish that now sits at the bottom of our oven. So whenever the oven goes on, it dries out those eggshells really nicely. And then I've got two things down. So this is a pestle and mortar. It was a Christmas present from my in-laws about 4 years ago. I could use that to grind our eggshells, but I'm not going to use that to grind our eggshells because I also have a coffee blender because I like coffee. I'm a big coffee drinker rather than tea. And this was a gift from it doesn't matter who it was from. The point is that this is a coffee blender, and I'm going to use that to grind our eggshells and then give it a rinse, and I will still use it for coffee, don't worry. So really quite simply, I am going to just fill this. There's a maximum level. Just going to fill this. I'll come back in a second. So there's my powder. My eggshell powder in my canister. I'm using one with a lid. It's really important that it has a lid because that means that I won't have to find something new to put it in afterwards. But the other thing is that I just want to stop it from exploding. So whilst this is a canister that you can seal really tightly, I'm not going to. I'm just going to put it down gently. I might put a mug of water, or I might just cover it like this once I add the acid. And then I'm going to put a bit of tissue paper or a cloth, probably just an e-cloth over the top so that the gases can escape and it's not too stinky. And we're going to leave it. Before we do that, and I promise you, everything that I do is super high tech, I'm going to use a children's ruler because the guidance, look, you can see this is actually a children's ruler and it's been used. These black marks that you can see on here are from when my son was putting 5 centimetre marks on the wood in the polytunnel so that it's easy for me to plant. I can just see that actually I've passed 3 little black marks, don't have to measure it, and in go my next row. Anyway, that's my kind of top tip for free. So the next thing I'm going to do is going to add my vinegar. So there really isn't very much in there. So the guidance says it's about, this is 10% and then 90% everything else. So I'm going to be maybe fill it by about 1/3 to 1/2 of vinegar. And that is it done. So what I'm expecting to happen, so I'm just sticking with the chemistry because it's kind of fun to learn what we're doing and why. So sticking with the chemistry, I'm going to make calcium acetate from my calcium carbonate, which is, calcium acetate is more soluble, which is why the plants can get it and why it's worth doing this rather than just crumbling it and shoving it on the bed. So what I should see released is lots of bubbles, and that's carbon dioxide being released. So remember I said I was going to fill it by about, look, you see the foam on top already, about 1/3 to 1/2. So I'm going to put a little bit more in, a little bit more, and then I'm going to stop. And you can see that it's got bubbles forming on top here. I'm going to give it a bit of a stir, speed up my chemical reaction, and you can see that there's all these bubbles coming up here. So let me just lift that, okay? So you can see all those bubbles forming nicely. And that's a good reason not to fill my jar to the top, because even as we've done it, I've excited my chemical reaction, and you can see that that is rising and rising and rising. And I can just see Anthony coming home and going, Rebecca, why did you stir it? So forgive me, I'm just going to get a bowl to put that in before it goes over the top. So from a science experiment perspective, this is brilliant. From a flower farmer's perspective, this is obviously not ideal because I don't want to lose any of this lovely calcium, and really I could have just let it sit. But from a demonstration perspective, look, this is science in action. Calcium carbonate goes to calcium acetate. I make a nice soluble solution. Doesn't look particularly attractive, but who cares? Mud, dirt doesn't look particularly attractive either, but my flowers will be absolutely beautiful. I'm just scooping this and popping it back in the side so that it stops being quite so excited and so that I don't lose any. So I'm in the house, I don't have any fancy equipment. So this is just a canister for, jams or fruit if you're going to bottle or pickle it. And it's from a place that is based in Sweden. I obviously can't give you any greater detail than that. You can get them from other shops on the high street too. And so I'm making my soluble solution that's going to make calcium more available to my plants, and I am just going to add it. It's quite therapeutic to play with. I am going to add it on its own. I'll water it down, so 1 part or 1 tablespoon of this, once it's finished, can be added to a 4 gallon, so a standard watering can, to water your things with. And then we could also just add in, if you want to, any other feed that you're using. So whether that is seaweed feed or nettle feed, or you might do a fish fermentation, any of those. You can add it and it will give you extra calcium so that your plants get a really good start and continue with really good root generation. Right, time to make tea. So there are a couple of things I really like about what we just did. One is that it is a bit of a low waste, fun thing to do. The second thing is I actually did the same thing yesterday with the children with some different eggshells. And it was a really fun way to get them involved and to show them what was going on, to learn some science. I promise you, I hated homeschool and I don't think they were fond of it, but that is science and learning. in action, and it's also part of our closed system, and just teaching them about what we can do with our waste products. They already know that we use our cardboard for compost and that we use our cardboard to line our beds, and so on. And they see us use water from the tumble dryer when we use it to water our plants and seedlings when I'm potting up in the kitchen. And now we've used eggshells. So they're learning even though they're not learning at a desk. And I really like that. So important things to think about next. It's going to go in the canister. It's going to sit there for about a week, and then I can use it. So it's a quick one as well. It doesn't have to be around for 4 months before you can use it. Just a week, which is really nice. And also you can top it up. So I could do several of these on the go. So I've done one today. We use eggs all the time, lots of baking in this house. And so we'll do another one soon, and when I do the next one, once it's finished fermenting, or not fermenting, effervescing, I'll be able to strain it and put that in with the amount that's already there, because it'll have gone through the same process. It won't be active anymore or doing any chemical reactions, and I can just kind of leave it there. You won't be able to extract all the calcium from the eggshells. Anything that's left when you've absolutely finished can go in your wormery, though worms don't really like acidic things, so they don't like lemons and onions and things, so we'll probably put it on the compost heap, and it can sit there and add compost, calcium to our compost, and it won't do any harm. It will break down eventually completely. Okay, that's enough for me for today. Calcium amendments, really good, importantly, if you've been paying attention, for root development and growth, and also for tissue and cell structure. So that's why I'm doing it. Thank you. Have a good evening. If you enjoyed what you've seen today, please do subscribe to the channel. There's a bell icon at the top, and you can do it there. Feel free to leave comments at the bottom. I love comments because it means I know whether we're doing the right thing or not, or whether you want to see more. And if you like what you've seen, then please encourage me to do more and buy me a coffee. There's a link at the bottom. I drink a lot of coffee. I really like it. You've just seen my coffee grinder doing other things. However, if I'm not using it for coffee, it will help us to grow our farm, which is ultimately what we want to do. Thank you very much. Bye.